So I think we're coming into an environment in which there's going to be a competition of what is a good currency. That competition will include crypto, it'll include gold, it'll include, I don't know, it could be NFTs, and it could be all sorts of, and it could be digital, ECNY, in other words, a digital Chinese currency. They're all going to be competing. As far as cryptocurrencies goes, I think we are in an era that one has to look at all currencies. What is money? What is currency? What is money? So a currency is both a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth. And a global currency is one that you can take from one place to another, so it's portable. And that's why gold, although in Asia also silver, gold and silver through a period of time were the monies because it had that attributes. And there's an era of one man's assets or another man's liabilities. But some of these assets like gold, it's private and it's not a liability. It's that asset. And so I think we're coming into an environment in which there's going to be a competition of what is a good currency. That competition will include crypto, it'll include gold, it'll include, I don't know, it could be NFTs, and it could be all sorts of, and it could be digital, ECNY, in other words, a digital Chinese currency. They're all going to be competing in terms of that, I think. This issue of then the printing of money. I think that this is particularly true now because as we look at sanctions are playing a role. Sanctions are, like countries, not just those that have been sanctioned, but those that question whether they could be sanctioned one way or another are thinking, what is a safe storehold of wealth? And if you look at history is really a good guide. The taking of another country's money is one of the great weapons. So like in World War II in Japan, just prior to the war, you always have these conflicts and you have somebody taking the money or make it difficult for access. So in prior to World War II, the United States froze Japanese assets. And so different countries worry that could happen to them, and that's changing the nature of where they're storing their money and how they're operating. So we can get into the pros and cons of crypto, and I think it's almost people pay too much attention to what's fashionable at the time and don't maybe look at one against the other and realize probably they need a diversification of those types of assets. So I would favor a more diversified view of those, because sometimes crypto people don't buy gold or gold people don't buy crypto and so on. And there's a certain dynamic. I think privacy is a big issue. It's increasingly so, which is driving people to gold. And but also crypto, it's a ledger. And so privacy can be cracked. And so there are these kinds of issues that are entering into this competition between these alternative types of money. When there's a lot of debt, then there's a requirement for paying. But paying can be very easy if the central bank prints the money and makes it easy to pay. So for example, the actions that were taken by the Federal Reserve mechanistically in coordination with the federal government, and not just in the United States, but in most countries, Europe, Japan, most countries, all countries, meant that the central governments sent out a lot of checks and provided support, and that the central bank provided backstops or liquidity so that that's possible. And so a lot of buying power. In the United States, about 5 times as much money was sent out that way than was actually required to provide compensation if you took all the losses of incomes and so on. A great deal more was provided. So that has an implication for the value of money. And so you've seen it, right? Money, when credit and liquidity is available, it causes the prices of goods, services, and financial assets to go up. So that this great liquidity that we've seen, and not only the liquidity itself, but also the capacity to borrow and get buying power, has had the effect of causing asset prices to rise, causing buying power to rise, and causing higher levels of inflation. So I think when we look ahead and we think about credit, we think about what is the probability of being paid back with, and so if you have a lot of debt, maybe that's a problem, or what is the probability of that being dealt with through the creation of money that makes it easier to pay back. So I think we're at an inflection point. I think that there's too much debt, and there's also, if we take pro forma financials of governments, we're going to have continued large deficits, and there's also a political need or desire to do that. Everybody wants to spend money, and this internal conflict requires more of that kind of spending. And so I don't think that you're going to see that kind of restraint so that it'll be paid back much with hard money. And so the question really is for bonds, what is the, how does that risk? The risk to me is a buying power risk. I think that investors and most people look at how much money they have, measuring it in nominal terms, and they're not used to thinking about it in purchasing power terms, real terms. And we're now in a tilt that's going to change, because as we have higher levels of inflation, the psychology changes. So think about holding bonds or cash in this environment. Last year we had a 7% inflation rate in the United States. Next year we might have a 5%. Now, if you're holding cash, for example, you lost about those amounts to buying power. So investor's perception of riskiness is changing and will increasingly change. And the amount of money that has to be, the amount of debt that has to be bought, let's say by governments, or you could include the private sector, it's the amount that is offered. So let's say governments have to offer that debt, so they fund a deficit. But if you get bond selling, or you get people realizing what the risks of cash are, and they don't want to hold it, you will get more selling than the amount that equals the deficit.